welcome to IndieSider, where I play indie games and interview the developer. My name is Ken Gagney, and this week I'm playing Plangman from Ehren von Lehe, available to play online on Congregate and a download from itch.io for PC and Mac at a price of your choosing. This game is a combination of platformer and Hangman, of all things, so let's check it out. So I am this running man, this two-dimensional character, and there are these 8 letters to choose from, and I have to spell a 4-letter word, as you can see at the top of the screen. And I just stand on top of a letter, and I press spacebar, and whoa, if it falls, then that was the wrong letter, and the game zooms in the screen a little bit. You can see at the bottom right of the screen, I have 4 zooms left. And then if I get one right, it zooms out, and I have 5 zooms left. And that's basically how many hit points you have. If I tap that, I have a clue. Something pops up in the background. So that is a clock. It's a 4-letter word that ends in T based on the letters available to me. I'm going to guess it's time. There we go. That was the right answer. Now, based on the word time, there's going to be a bit of a narrative that develops. Once upon a time. Let's figure out what we can do next. So, 4-letter word does not have the letter Y. Now, the letter fell, but there was something for it to land on rather than going to the abyss. So now I can push it left or right if I want, and use it to climb up. And there's the platforming aspect. And that might even be a bit of a puzzler, because there are more puzzles to be found later in the game as well. What's this question mark? It's a bonus zoom out. Great. So let's see. 4 letters. Looks like a heart and an asteroid. Love, maybe? L. Is there an O in the house? O. E. And where's the V? Let's try right here. Boom! So this game really gets to me in a good way because of the monochromatic aesthetic. This is just the kind of game I grew up playing on the Apple II computer. And as you'll hear as I speak with the developer, the same is true for him as well. Now, I am a huge fan of the Apple II in that I publish a quarterly magazine about the Apple II computer, I attend an annual conference, and I co-founded the only monthly Apple II podcast. So I am a fan, you could say. And I had no idea, to be honest, that the developer is as well. I just knew that he was inspired by the aesthetic. That is a Pegasus, a flying horse, a 7-letter word with a U and a T. Well, not an F. S. Mustang. There we go. I figured that out. Now, if I were to die, which you can't just do by falling, because that only just removes some of your zooms, then you start the level over, but there is a different word to choose from, or to figure out. So it's not always the same word on every level. 226 hit points. Wonder why that is. So you can't just zip through the levels with the same words every time. It is a little bit of a puzzle. Where's the A? It's over here. So I'll finish this level. This is level 3, I believe. Yes, 3 of 25. You can see in the lower right. Also, you can move slowly if you want by holding on the shift. And I can just move those instructions off the lower left entirely by pushing escape. And the soundtrack is available separately from Bandcamp. It says in the interview it's on CD Baby. That's a mistake. It's Bandcamp. And the soundtrack is also developed by Ehren von Lehe. All of which you'll hear in the interview. So if you want to hear the interview, stay tuned to this video. Or if you just want to listen to the interview without the gameplay, you can find IndieSider as an audio podcast at IndieSider.net. Download it through iTunes, Overcast, Stitch, or whatever you like. I fell in love. It was beautiful. Twin fusion drives, a Mustang, there's that word, hull, license plate, Aowen. So stay tuned for my interview with Ehren von Lehe. Today I have the honor of speaking with the developer and creator of Plangman, that being Mr. Ehren von Lehe. Hello, Ehren.
Hi.
How are you today?
Well, pretty good.
Thanks for giving me some of your time. So I've been playing Plangman, and as I mentioned, it jumped out at me from this list on Game Informer of 15 free indie games you need to play right away due to its very retro-inspired aesthetic. The website says this is a long-lost game. How long has this game been lost?
Well, I guess it's, on one level, it's just has to do with the way it looks and feels, but it has been something I've been working on for a while. So the initial idea actually started back in 1999. I was taking an introductory programming class, and we had to do a Hangman game, and I ended up doing something where there was a character on a bridge made out of letter blocks. You would basically end up with gaps that you couldn't jump over and things like that. That was the basic idea, and even back then the there was a little bit of Apple II influence because the character I used was based on Captain Goodnight. I don't know if you've played Captain Goodnight, but that was the kind of initial prototype, which was almost, I guess, 20 years ago now. Wow. And then in like 2009, 2010, I started learning Unity and doing some game prototypes and things. And this was one of the ideas that I pulled out, dusted off, and started playing around with. And around the same time, we were moving and had gotten an old Apple II from my parents. And my son was sitting down and playing it, and it was it had one of the phosphor screen monitors, so the green monochrome, and I was just like, wow, that looks so amazing. And I was just really struck with that look. And I'd been toying with, what's the main character going to be, what's the look going to be, and when I saw that, I was just like, this is what I want it to look like. So that's how that came about.
I never have actually played myself the game Captain Goodnight and the Islands of Fear. It came out in 1995 from Broderbund. I really thought that your main character's protagonist was based on the Olympic decathlon athlete from Microsoft.
Yeah, so I actually I hadn't seen that. I've never played that game. I hadn't seen that runner until a couple days ago. But yeah, it is a little bit similar. But yeah, the character is not Captain Goodnight, but there was an artist who actually did the run animation. I had given him some instructions that weren't exactly clear, and his first thing that he did, wasn't what I was looking for. And finally I was like, oh, like I can just say, look at this, screen footage of Captain Goodnight. This is the kind of look I'm going for. So that, yeah, it was definitely influenced by Captain Goodnight.
One of the things that really caught me about the game, even before I saw the aesthetic, was the trailer, because you show the game booting up in an actual Apple II. So you're quite blatant with your inspirations, which I love.
Yeah, and that Apple II is actually captured that footage off of the Apple II I grew up playing. So it's, I don't know, very personal, I guess you could say.
That's amazing. You still have that Apple II?
I do, yeah. It's sitting over on a desk not far from where I'm sitting right now.
Oh, that's excellent. There are a ton of Apple II users spread all throughout the country. I'm sure there are some in your neck of the woods. I'll connect you after the podcast.
Yeah, sure.
So this game is inspired by some of the aesthetics of Captain Goodnight, and maybe subconsciously or even inadvertently the Olympic decathlon runner. Were there any other sort of retro games or Apple II games that may have had an influence on your design, either the aesthetic or even the mechanics? For example, the narrative, in a way, sort of reminds me of Braid, which is not an Apple II game, but by now I think it's old enough to be retro.
Yeah, so I was definitely influenced by the Apple II, but I don't know if there's a ton of direct things I can point to. But when I was growing up, I didn't have game consoles. My friends did, so I played the NES and the Super Nintendo and Sega and things like that at friends' houses. But when I was younger, we just had the Apple II at home. So my sort of gaming sensibilities were really shaped by the games I played on that platform. And in addition, it wasn't just Apple II games, but it was a very particular set of Apple II games that we had a family friend. He was probably around 7 years older than I was, who he must have had access to bulletin boards or something, and he came over at one point and just copied a whole bunch of Apple II software. So those were the games I had. They were like handwritten labels, or with a little label maker, and it was so playing games was like this process of discovery where I had no idea what these games were. You sometimes just knew the title, which was sometimes wrong. Actually, things were mislabeled. So you'd like boot this thing up, and half the fun of playing games was like discovering what was on this disc and how does it work. And we had no manuals or anything. So I did have some games that were, I guess, legitimate and purchased, but most of the games were just things that I had gotten from this family friend of ours. So that whole process of when I first was, doing the prototyping, I really hadn't played a lot of modern games, and I wasn't really familiar. I was kind of clueless about a lot of the changes that had happened in terms of making things easier, having tutorials, all that kind of stuff. So I released an initial prototype of just the basic, platforming and Hangman combined mechanic. There was no story. It was very minimal, but in like late 2010, it didn't save your progress. Like if you got a game over, you had to start the game over, because that's what I was familiar with from when I was a kid, and also from other systems, like the NES. So there was a whole bunch of things that I did just, sort of out of cluelessness that were influenced by my experience. And, I got a lot of player feedback and improved things, but definitely like the difficulty level, and just the look and feel, and just, I think some of the sensibility of, as I added the story and other things, just the sense of fun and creativity and kind of doing a lot with minimal elements. Like Load Runner is a great example of that. You just have a small number of elements and you create, incredible variety and gameplay out of those elements. So those are some of the ways. The story, I didn't play a lot of text adventures when I was younger. I did really enjoy adventure games. King's Quest VI is probably one of my favorite games of all time. So I always loved things that had a story, but I didn't get familiar with text adventures until actually watching the documentary that came out a few years ago about text adventures, and that was kind of inspirational too. Just using text and creating things in the player's imagination without actually creating them on screen is a really neat thing.
The documentary you're referring to, is that Get Lamp by Jason Scott?
Yes, that's the one.
Yeah, that is a seminal work. He really did an amazing piece with that, and there's actually an annual Apple II users convention in Kansas City where he gave the keynote a couple years ago.
Cool. Is that Kansas Fest?
That is it exactly. You're familiar with it.
Yeah, I've never been, but I've heard about it.
Yeah, it's the registration for this year's event just opened up, and I believe Jason will be there again. So one of the things you added to Plangman over the course of its evolution was a narrative, and as I've been playing the game, I've died often enough that I've discovered I'm not always solving the same puzzle on every level, and it seems like the narrative is based on what puzzle I solve. So how many different branching narratives are there in this game?
There's actually just one. You're not the only person. It's funny, with some recent changes where that I've made to ensure that don't repeat and things like that. A number of people have gotten the impression, I think, that the narrative is branching, but it actually isn't. It's just different words taken from the one narrative. So hopefully that's not too disappointing, but that's that's how it works. But there are, in the 25 or so levels, there's around 80 different words. So, hopefully that, and there's, I may be adding more in the future. We'll see. But, that's one way to hopefully make it fun to replay and, create a variety of the experience of playing it over time.
And it was a pleasant surprise. When I died the first time and I had to start over a level, I'm like, okay, I already know what the first 3 out of the 5 letters are, so I just went to select those, and they were wrong. I'm like, wait, they were right a minute ago. I was not expecting that level of replayability, and it was quite welcome.
Cool.
So there's that narrative that we talked about. Obviously, the name of the game, Plangman, is a combination of platform and Hangman, because there's a lot of running around and jumping. But there's also a good deal of puzzling going on here. I can't just go right from point A to point B once I know what the letters are. I need to figure out how to get there and where to use my bombs judiciously and how to get to the letters even though I can see them plainly on the screen. The path is not obvious.
Mm-hmm.
So why call it Plangman, not like Plangmanzer, when there's a lot of puzzler in there too.
I'll have to consider that for the sequel, maybe. Yeah, there's definitely a strong puzzle element, but I didn't think about trying to work that into the name of the game.
It's an important part of the game, though, and one that sometimes has me completely stuck. You've taken what I consider to be an unusual measure in which you provide a walkthrough for your own game. You don't say what the words are in each level, because those rotate, but you generally say how to get from point A to point B, and most developers don't spoil their own games that way. So why did you choose to provide that supplement to your game?
Yeah. I guess it comes down to the fact that different people play differently. So some people want to figure everything out themselves. Other people, if they get stuck, they'll just abandon the game or, stop. They'll lose interest or something. So, I think it would have been cool if somebody who enjoyed the game had created a walkthrough or something. But I've also been making changes frequently based on player feedback. So even if someone had done that, it it may have been out of date by this time. So I think it's just, I would get questions from people who were stuck on things, and instead of just sending one-off replies and things like that, I decided to just document it, and that way people who were curious, if they got stuck and wanted to use a walkthrough, they could access it, and if not, they could keep trying to figure it out themselves. But it's also a way to help people who there's different players of different abilities, and some people are it's kind of in the middle between like a pretty difficult platformer and a casual game. So some people find it pretty challenging, and other people, I think, they're like, well, it's moderately difficult, but they're able to figure it out without using any hints or anything. And it was just a way of helping support a wider variety of players who might be interested in playing it.
Oh, that's very cool. You want to make the game accessible. You don't want people to get frustrated unless they can sense some progress.
Yeah, or if they like, the getting frustrated and then pounding their head and eventually figuring it out. Some people enjoy that sense of accomplishment when you push past a point of confusion or not being able to progress.
Right. You mentioned that you wanted to keep the walkthrough updated because the game has evolved due to player feedback. The game originally was released in November, and here we are in February. It's already at version 1.6, which, unless you're using Google Chrome's numbering system, is actually a lot of evolution in a short amount of time. How has the game changed since its original release in November?
So the biggest thing that changed was the punishment reward system. So the initial prototype that I released back in 2010, which was very simplified, didn't have the story, the physics and the word puzzles were sort of separate. There was physics puzzles with regular blocks, and then there was the word guessing with letter blocks. That game was pretty well received, and it ended up getting quite a few plays on Congregate and getting picked up by some gaming press. So as I worked on improvements over the last few years, just kind of, I guess you could say clandestinely, or just, I would show it to friends or send it to some people. And one of the points of feedback that I was getting was that it was, people were having the experience that you had when resetting, except in the opposite. So initially there was just one word for each level. I hadn't taken the time to, I was just kind of trying to prototype out the basic paths. So I just had one word, and people discovered pretty quickly that, hey, if I die or if I reset, there was actually no forced resets either. So people would discover, hey, if I reset, I know exactly what letters to guess. I can run through, guess a few random things, reset, and now I've gained some information. So I sort of overreacted to that, and I ended up making the minimum zoom level really harsh and making it so that if you reset, you didn't get your zooms back and stuff like that. And so the initial, and then I also had the brilliant move of making those changes and then not thinking to playtest them or send them to anyone. It was so I actually released it with those changes in place, and it was interesting because I put it on the new version on Congregate, and it was totally different reception than the prototype I had done a few years ago. And it wasn't even like people were telling me what they hated about it. It was just like, why am I getting 1-star ratings and nobody's leaving any comments? Like, what's going on? So I had to follow up with some of the people who liked the previous version, or who liked what I had done with the new version, but had feedback on it. And also I did some play testing as well, and just was like, okay, I started realizing what some of the issues were. And so it actually took a lot of iteration. I mean, it might sound kind of obvious now that it's landed, but it took a lot of iteration to really nail that down, that, okay, when you reset, you typically will get a different word. There's some levels that may only have one word, and there's forced reset. So if you're zoomed in all the way, you can't just, it's not like free to just run around and guess randomly, which is what was happening previously. So it's like some pretty basic stuff. There was other things like improving the randomization of where correct letters are located, and some things like that where people felt like it was too predictable. in certain cases, they would sort of remember, oh, this is where, there's always a correct letter in this place. So that was the biggest thing that required iteration. The second piece is just the difficulty curve of the initial levels. Like, I've really ended up making those a lot easier and a lot more gradual of an introduction to the basic mechanics. And that's based off playtesting and just feedback from people, and also looking at statistics on Congregate and seeing where people abandon the game. And okay, if you see a huge spike in level 3, it's like, okay, what's going on there? And gradually it seems to have smoothed out. But it's always surprising, the things you don't expect that can be difficult for people, because you're just so close to it and so familiar with it. And so it's really great getting outside perspective, and especially from people who are not people who play a lot of games, because those people tend to not have a lot of trouble with the initial levels. But sometimes people could get really confused with things that were just really surprising. But when you thought about it, it's like, yeah, that totally makes sense. Like, I can understand why you may have thought that, or why that was frustrating. One of the classic things is, like, in the second level, you're supposed to push a block, and people would get confused about, like, how do I get up to the next level? And I was just like, why is this so hard? And then I had a few people who tried it, and the first thing they would do is they would drop the block, run to the left, because there were arrows pointing in that direction. The arrows were supposed to indicate push the block, but people would just run that way. They couldn't get up, so then they would run back to the right, and they would end up accidentally pushing the block to the right instead of the left, and then knocking it off into the abyss, and then basically getting stuck. And so if you look at the game now, that level is basically set up so you can push it either direction, and you cannot push that block into the abyss and lose it. It's basically set up so you hopefully fall into the pit of success one way or the other. So those are some examples of things that I've had to change.
You mentioned being inspired by watching your son play on the old Apple II. Has your son played Plangman?
Yeah. My two oldest kids, son and daughter, both enjoy playing it. So yeah, they've done some play testing for me.
And they've given it the thumbs up?
Yeah, they enjoy it. They it's a pretty good gauge. My son is slightly more experienced with playing games like this using the keyboard controls and things, and my daughter's slightly less experienced, but she really enjoys it as well. So it's kind of a nice test of different abilities when they try something out. Yeah, they definitely have enjoyed the game.
Nice. Now, the game obviously has a great aesthetic. I was also really impressed by the soundtrack. I love the tunes, which are all available on CD Baby. There will be a link in the show notes. And you list on your CD Baby website what the various instruments and tools that you use to create this soundtrack. So those tools are not things that you just happen to have lying around the house, like GarageBand is something everybody has, but the other stuff is a little bit more complex. So you've obviously crafted other tunes before. What approach did you go with to make the Plangman soundtrack unique? Like, what were you trying to develop that was different from a tune you might make for something else?
Well, so the initial prototype that I released in 2010, I got permission to use some chiptune music from some really great artists, and people really loved the music. But for the sort of final version, or the next iteration, I wanted to do the music myself, and I was looking for a different sound, something that was more analog rather than purely digital, and sort of evoked I just think of it as the sounds of my childhood when I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to do for the music, but I ended up coming across the Arturia SEM-V, Oberheim SEM-V virtual synth, and when I heard the sounds, it was just like hearing my childhood. It was like just reminiscent of those sounds that I remember as a kid on TV, on the radio, various places, in movies. So I decided to use that, and that was really, really fun to play around with, and just they've done an amazing job with creating something that really captures, I think, in my opinion, pretty well the analog sound. Typically I haven't always been a big fan of virtual like emulation of things, but in this case they seem to have nailed it pretty well. I actually started working on the music before I had the story, before I had any. It was very early on. It was like in 2012, I think. I actually created the first song, which is the last song in the game, and it just sort of evoked the feeling that I wanted the game to convey, I guess. And just continued. I have a full-time job. I've got married, and I have kids, and so I had to work on the game and the music and everything else sort of here and there, an hour or two here and there, some pretty long periods of time of not working on it. So doing it electronically was easy in that regard without having to set up microphones and that kind of thing. And then it was also just really fun to experiment and discover things and try to recreate some of the sounds and the feelings that I remember as a kid. So I would say, in general, it's just kind of cinematic was the feel I was going for, but there's definitely, elements of synth pop and new wave music and whatnot thrown in there as well.
So just like the game itself, it combines a lot of different elements.
Yeah.
So I found this game, as I mentioned, through a Game Informer post, which linked to the itch.io page for the game. And I unfortunately have not had many games on this podcast from that platform. A lot of them come from Steam. In fact, there are times when I don't know what game to feature next, so I'll just go trolling through the Steam list to find something that's new and indie. Perhaps I should be spending more time on itch.io. What made you choose that platform to release your game on?
I guess, yeah. It wasn't like some necessarily, deeply thought out decision. It was, I guess, a little bit of at some point last year, I sent the game, an early build of the game, to GOG, and it got rejected. They said, I think it said something along the lines of it was lacking in production quality or something like that. So I don't know if I used too few colors or something.
I don't think they understood what you were going for at all, if that's their feedback.
Yeah, so I thought it might be a good fit for that audience especially. But so after that, I just, I didn't necessarily feel the like taking on the workload and the stress of running a Steam Greenlight campaign or something like that. So I was just like, I just want to get this out there. So itch.io was a very easy way to do that. And, at this point I've been optimizing for getting player feedback, just trying to play it. And so it's been a good experience. And, a handful of people choose to pay for it, but it's nice to not have that be a barrier for people to try it out and play it.
That's a great philosophy. I like that. Plangman has been out a couple of months now. It continues to be evolved. People can pick it up online. Can you remind us where to go to get updates about this game, or to plunk down $1 or not and try it out for themselves?
The main page is plangman.com, and that has links to the walkthrough and the itch.io page and the soundtrack, and also the version that's on Congregate. Yeah, and that's where you can go.
And for those who don't want to download the game to their Mac or PC, they can play it right online in their web browser via Congregate, correct?
Yeah, it does only work on Mac or PC because it uses the Unity web player. It's an option for people who may not want to download it.
Excellent. Well, Ehren von Lehe, thank you so much for giving us some time to talk about Plangman. I've really enjoyed it. Like I said, there aren't many people out there who have a fascination with both indie games and the Apple II. I think this game would appeal to anybody who has either of those interests, but for it to hit me with both of those was a real unexpected sweet spot. I've really enjoyed it.
Great. Thanks so much for having me on.